Good Monday afternoon, and thank you for joining us on KARE 11 News Now. I'm Rena Sargentopoulos. Let's get right to your headlines. Just in this afternoon, the Supreme Court giving the Trump administration the go-ahead to start revoking special legal privileges for thousands of Venezuelan immigrants. The justices granting an emergency application that reverses a decision made by the Biden administration extending temporary protected status to more than 300,000 Venezuelans. The original order granted that protected status to people fleeing the political instability in Venezuela. Happening right now at the state capitol in St. Paul, lawmakers have until 11:59 tonight to wrap up this year's legislative session. However, it's not likely going to happen. A special session is almost certain, as lawmakers have a long list of things to get done before the gavel drops. While the framework for the budget is now agreed upon, many details still need to be ironed out. The largest are compromises over health care. We just heard from Senate Majority Leader Erin Murphy as lawmakers gavelled in just after 11.
We have worked all session long in bipartisan form to try and find a resolution for Minnesotans with this budget. And today we've come in, we have begun our session, and we're going to caucus and recess because the House has not delivered any more work for us to process. It is deeply frustrating. I knew that we were going to held into a special session, and that's okay if we need to finish up our work. But when you reach a conclusion in a negotiation and new conditions are being added that slow down the budget, that's frustrating.
Lawmakers do believe a special session would be a short one, possibly even wrapping up before Memorial Day. Now, lawmakers have approved several bills in the final hours of the 2025 legislative session. Let's take a look at some of them. The public safety bill cleared, and it includes funding for law enforcement, revised penalties for certain offenses, and a new felony offense for adults who expose a child to fentanyl. Lawmakers in both houses also overwhelmingly approved reforms to the state's DWI laws. Some of the changes include increasing time that repeat offenders must use ignition interlock devices to start their cars. And both chambers voted to strip $77 million in funding from the Northern Lights Express. The proposed rail service would run between the Twin Cities and Duluth, but opponents say that project is effectively dead. Some major progress fighting raging wildfires in northern Minnesota. Right now, the Jenkins Creek fire is showing the first signs of containment since sparking 1 week ago. According to the Incident Command Team, the fire is 6% contained and has burned more than 6,000 acres of land. The nearby Camp House fire also getting pushed back. Right now, it is 31% contained. And the smaller Munger Shaw fire just outside of Duluth is about 95% contained at this point. Happening right now, communities across St. Louis are preparing for another round of storms after that devastating outbreak Friday afternoon. Thousands of homes were destroyed in the deadly EF3 twister that ripped through the area. And right now, a curfew is in effect across most of those affected areas. NBC's Shaquille Brewster is in St. Louis with a closer look.
Hi there. Well, yes, so much devastation, so much heartbreak across this region that is preparing for another round of severe weather. It was on Friday when this EF3 tornado tore through St. Louis, claiming 7 lives, a storm that was on the ground for more than 23 miles. And just look at some of the devastation that it caused. You see the entire front of this home completely torn down. This is a scene that you're not just seeing block by block in this city, but really neighborhood by neighborhood. But we heard from city officials that the focus has shifted from preservation of life to storm preparation. And you see some of that taking place right up there. Some people putting up tarps, doing what they can to clean up and prepare for what we know will be another round of severe weather. Now, this outbreak that we saw did not just hit St. Louis, it did not just hit Missouri, but also extended into Kansas, where there you had 19 people killed, the number that the governor warned could increase as the days and weeks continue, as they continue their search and rescue efforts. So there's a lot of sensitivity here. You have communities coming together, doing what they can to clean up ahead of what we know will be another round of storms, as more than 30 million people are under some severe weather threat as we go into later today. Back to you.
A look from the White House today, where President Trump is holding high-stakes phone calls with Ukrainian President Zelensky and Russian President Putin. Trump trying to broker a peace deal between the two countries and end their 3-year-long war that has killed thousands of people. Just this weekend, Zelensky meeting with Vice President J.D. Vance at the Vatican. Vance says both Ukraine and Russia will present ideas for a ceasefire and the negotiations will go from there.
I think honestly that President Putin, he doesn't quite know how to get out of the war. If you think about this, he's got 1 million men under arms. He's re-engineered his entire economy. What used to be manufacturing facilities making products for people to use in their civilian life, they're now making tank shells and artillery shells and drones. And so this is a little bit of guess, but I think the president would agree that part of this is I'm not sure that Vladimir Putin has a strategy himself for how to unwind the war.
Happening right now, a massive search for several inmates who escaped their Louisiana prison cells and have been on the run for days. The sheriff in New Orleans saying a series of failures led to the jailbreak and the inmates may have had help from inside the department. Right now, several corrections officers are on administrative leave. Meanwhile, 3 of the escaped men have been captured. Authorities say they have intelligence on the other 7 that are still on the run. Police are warning that the men who escaped are armed and dangerous and are asking the public to report anything that they may know. Well, new this afternoon, Vice President J.D. Vance extending an invitation to Pope Leo XIV to visit the United States during a meeting at the Vatican today. Vance led the U.S. delegation to Sunday's formal inauguration mass, opening the pontificate for the first American pope. NBC's Ralph Sanchez reports from the Vatican.
Pope Leo today holding a formal audience with Vice President Vance here at the Vatican. It was one of his first sit-down meetings with a world leader following yesterday's inaugural mass. And of course, there is a little bit of history here because before he was elected Pope, Leo did post on social media criticizing some of the vice president's rhetoric. But from what we can tell, this was a friendly meeting today. The vice president actually brought the Pope a jersey from the Chicago Bears because Pope Leo is, of course, a Chicago native. Now, yesterday, St. Peter's Square packed with a crowd of some 200,000 people there to greet the first American Pope. I can tell you we saw a lot of American flags out in the crowd. And then Pope Leo delivered his homily where he laid out his priorities. He called for unity in the church and peace in a world scarred by violence, hatred, and prejudice. And there was a little bit of peacemaking on the sidelines of the Mass. We saw Vice President Vance meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. That is their first in-person encounter since that fiery showdown in the Oval Office back in February. So I think what we are seeing here is a new pope who is aiming to be not just a pastor, but also a global peacemaker. Ralph Sanchez, NBC News at the Vatican.
The Western Conference Finals are now set. Starting tomorrow, the Wolves will face the Oklahoma City Thunder after OKC's dominant win over Denver yesterday. The first 2 games will be in Oklahoma. Will Hall and Julia Daniels will be there covering both games. Then Saturday and next Monday, the series comes home for games 3 and 4. It'll then be back and forth on location should games 5 through 7 be necessary, with game 6 happening here in Minnesota. Now, all tip-off times are set for 7:30, except if there's a game 7. That one will be at 7 o'clock. Well, we lost a lot of trees in last week's storms, but tonight we're going to single out one special one in Medina. Why? Well, for one, it was beloved by more than one family. It turns out it was also recognized by the state. Here's Kent Erdahl.
We're going to miss it tremendously.
The loss of any really large tree
7 feet 3 inches.
is hard to measure.
That's the limb.
Jesse Altringer says this was the second of 2 giant limbs that split off their massive white spruce this week. The first one gave way Sunday
It went that way and took out the power line,
during our extremely dry conditions.
and it started 2 fires, one on our property and then a bigger fire down on our neighbor's.
Fortunately, she says the fires were quickly extinguished, but yesterday high winds finished it off.
I thought my husband was underneath it.
She says her husband was gardening directly below, just minutes before it came crashing down.
I was terrified for a second until I screamed and yelled for him and he came out of the barn.
After their initial relief, they began to mourn a tree that meant a lot to many generations.
It had a good life. We'll just honor it in other ways.
It sounds like you're saying it was part of the family.
It is definitely part of the family.
And not just their own family.
It is an awesome tree, uniquely shaped. That's what Mary Pepin said.
The Pepin family owned this property for 150 years before Jessie and her husband bought it in 2011.
We're tree people. if you can't tell.
And the Pappins thought so highly of the tree
This is the Minnesota Big Tree application,
that they sent it to the state for measurement in the year 2000.
second largest in Minnesota. It was a showpiece.
A showpiece they desperately tried to preserve.
It's the only big tree we watered. We have the water spikes. They're about 4 feet long. You put them in the ground and you hook them up to hose. So the roots were getting water.
It's just the inside of the tree. Like, how would you know that is dead?
Though everything looked good up top and around the trunk during a spring tree trim in March,
You can just pick pieces off.
something was clearly wrong
It's dry rot.
beneath the surface.
There's nothing there. There's no moisture in the tree.
Which is why she now understands how lucky they were to enjoy it for so long.
At least more than 150 years. It might be 200 or 300 years old. I don't know. We'll find out when we get to the bottom.
And when the time comes to count its rings, they'll also count their blessings.
My husband's a woodworker, so he's going to make some stuff out of that. Little reminders.
I think you got a little bit to work with here.
We have so much to work with. Yes.
In Medina, Kent Erdahl, KARE 11 News.
If you've never heard of Minnesota's Native Big Tree Registry, it is a real thing. It even has its own website where you can learn more about how your own big tree might measure up. But if you submit an application, the DNR says you're going to need to be patient. There is a huge backlog because foresters are spread pretty thin right now. Well, stick with us. More news and weather coming up after the break.